Today we're here to honor the great Quincy Jones and convey to you what was so important about his music. And it has to do with something much deeper. It was, who was this person? How did he live his life? How did he look at music and art and convey that through the output of his creativity, which extended into films, television, live performances, pretty much everything he touched. Quincy was an icon because he was so uniquely qualified to do so many different things, and he used all of those abilities that he also worked really hard to hone to come together and express things to people along the way in a very unique way that only Quincy could do it. And those of us that had a chance to work with him in any way usually got these golden drops of wisdom that we carried through the rest of our lives. Ed is one of them. I couldn't think of anyone better than legendary producer and record executive Ed Eckstine to come here and tell us a lot of personal stories. So Ed is here today to reminisce, talk about Quincy's work, talk about his experience and how things flowed through the good times, sometimes through the struggles, how things have changed in the business, and how we can take everything from Quincy's amazing legacy and apply it to today and move things forward. So I'm really privileged to have Ed here to thoughtfully bring you his personal experiences. So let's get into it. Ed, thank you for being here under the circumstances, and I'm sorry for your loss. And I know you spent as much time with Quincy as anyone on earth, maybe except his family, obviously, and in a very intimate setting, and we're in the peak period of his life.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
The first thing I wanted to do is just bring to everyone's attention all the different talents that Quincy had.
He began as a trumpet player, songwriter, composer, arranger, producer, record company executive, film composer, TV composer, record producer, I forgot A&R man, record executive, TV producer and creator of TV shows. You know, he did Fresh Prince and Mad TV, amongst other things. Music director, Duke Ellington, I Love You Madly, the CBS TV show from 1973 that he produced, which honored Duke Ellington on his 75th birthday. Father, friend, and all-around badass. Right, and like pretty much top of the food chain at every single one of those things. Absolutely, absolutely. I've known him since I was 7 years old. That's when I first met him. Because he'd signed my father to Mercury Records when my father was Billy Eckstine. He signed my dad when he was an A&R man at Mercury. And the summer when I was 7 to be 8 years old, Dad was touring. And Quincy was doing sort of, little side gigs just to get out of the office and out of the corporate climbs. He'd come on the road and conduct for my dad. He'd have the orchestra. And the tour that summer was my dad, the Quincy Jones Orchestra, Four Tops were my dad's backup singers, Nipsey Russell and Red Fox were the comedians on the show, depending on the time. The early shows was Nipsey Russell, the late shows were Red Fox.
Nice.
There was a dance act called Coles and Atkins, Honey Coles and Charlie Atkins. Honey Coles was famous for many things, but he was most notably known for being the guy who taught Gregory Hines tap, and Charlie Atkins became infamous because he was the guy who did all the choreography for the Motown acts, all that cool Motown Temptations choreography. It's all Charlie Atkins. Honey and Charlie were the dance acts on the show, and that was that. So Quincy was actually conducting the orchestra, and during the days when we were on the road during the summer, Pops would love to play golf. So on the off days, I either had the option of hanging out at the golf course with the old man or with my mom going to see relatives in some of the cities. which was cool, but it would lose its charm. I loved hanging out with my dad, but golf was never my thing, so it was kind of boring. And one night on the gig, we're at the Apollo, I think it was. I didn't realize, because they used to do like 5 shows a day, I didn't realize that between shows they would drop the curtain and run a movie in the theater. So unbeknownst to me, I would go sit on the drums and go bash shit out of the drums. And at one point they came and yanked me off the drums because folks were watching a movie. Here's some kid backstage beating the shit out of the drums. So they yanked me off the drums, and Quincy was the one who came out there and yanked me off the drums. And he asked me, he said, "Hey, man," he said, "what are you doing tomorrow?" I said, "My dad, I'm hanging with my dad, golf course." He goes, "You want to come with me? I'm doing a clinic somewhere in New York," because he was sponsored by either Kahn or Olds or Selmer Trumpets at that time. He said, "I'm doing a clinic, probably at Manny's Music in New York, for aspiring arranger, conductors, and players." I said, "Yeah, sure, cool." So I went and hung out with him.
How old were you?
I was 7.
7. So he took a 7-year-old.
Took a 7-year-old, to a music store. It was like a kid in a candy store. Took me to do it, and it was cool. It was fun, and he was playing, and other young trumpet players would turn up, and he'd sit there and orchestrate or whatever he was doing that particular day. If he was showing kids orchestration or whatever the case may be, but it was kids coming to do it, coming to learn from quote unquote a master. So I did that, and then the next city we went to, we did it again. And, I sort of became his little brother, nephew, cousin, whatever,
I wanted to ask you, what are the most memorable observations watching Quincy evolve as an artist, but also as a person? And I would think you started working with him, like you met him when you were a child, but you started working with him after the aneurysm, right?
No, right before the aneurysm.
Before, so even more so, you experienced him going through that. So there's things that you experience as a producer or anybody in the music business that's ups and downs, but then he dealt with a true life and death experience.
Absolutely. Yep. I remember when I first was starting to work with him, or coming around a lot, it was before he'd formally hired me. Went by his house one Sunday afternoon, and he was laying in the hammock in the front yard with score paper, and he was just writing that he was hearing in his head, writing it down on score paper, and just write it and toss it, write it and toss it, That was pretty cool. I was like, "Dude, what are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm just writing what I'm hearing in my head." He was hearing little horn licks, he was writing out passages and whatever, E flat minor, write it down and have it. That kind of stuff was interesting to me because I'd never seen anybody doing that before. My experience with it was seeing my pops, sit at the piano and work out something on the piano or on his trumpet, but never like a score paper, hearing the music in your head that way. The other things that immediately captured me very early was his attention to detail, because I didn't have a great deal of attention to detail at that point, because I'm 19 years old, so I'm just scattered all over the place, detail, schmetail. And then he was very meticulous about, pay attention, write it down. He said, if there's one thing he used to always say to me, he would start talking about, "Write it down, Edward, write it down, write it down."
He did. I remember him having a lot of note cards out when he was working on actually even on Thriller, I remember, and he would write the song titles, and he was thinking about how to sequence, because he was thinking of it as a big picture, right, in a cinematic kind of way. So you noticed that he wrote a lot of things.
Absolutely.
Down.
From day one, and his notes were it was always crazy. Legal pad or whatever piece of paper was immediately available. He'd write stuff, he'd put circles around it, almost looked like cartoon things, air bubbles in the cartoons. Have a thought, whatever it was, and how it connected to, he'd have something in the center that it was based on, then offshoots from it, this connects to this way, You'd look at it and say, "This is a crazy person," but it all connected. The dots all connected in his head, and if you studied it well enough, you'd figure it out.
Do you think he wrote because you mentioned in your memoirs that he sat you down before he offered you the opportunity to work with him, right? And expressed to you his goals, his dreams, aspirations. Do you think that he was writing that down?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was. I mean, he always, the thing that I got from him, didn't take advantage of it as much as or didn't apply it as much as I should have, because as they say, youth is wasted on the young, he was very focused on terms of, I want to do this, and if I'm going to do this, then this begat that begat that, and this is this. And he would connect all his dots. He'd have all his dots connected in his head in terms of how he planned to execute his plan. Always had to have a plan. He had a plan for everything.
He could see it, I think.
He could see it, absolutely.
The reason I say that is sometimes he would describe arrangements, and because I did a couple of arrangements and sounds in visual ways, like something kind of blue or something like that.
Right.
So I could see and these are things that maybe today, you don't do it as much, like writing down and then maybe like keeping it with you and referring to these like visualizations and writings so that you can stay on track, right? As things change.
I remember once Louis Johnson, Louis Johnson, who played bass on many Quincy records back in the day. Louis came to the studio. He had just finished doing a date for Herb Alpert. And I guess when Louis came to the studio, he was explaining to Quincy, he said, yeah, man, he kept talking about, make it more yellow. Make it more yellow. And Louis was like, what the is he talking about? And Quincy explained it to him. He said, Quentin piano and played something. He said, what color does that bring to your mind? It was just really kind of fiery, and it's red. Right. He said, yellow, he wants something a little more, little mellower, Lou. He would do that, or he and Bruce Swedien, his engineer, would speak in terms of garlic salt. Needs a little more garlic salt. Needs a little more red pepper, stuff like that when he was doing stuff. Those were his nuances.
Yeah, because I think the more I look back on it, and I include a lot of that stuff in my, probably everybody that touches Quincy, you see these good ideas, right? And it's really useful to allow the musicians some direction, give them some direction, but allow them the room to interpret what does spicier mean, like you said, garlic salt or something. Well, what does that mean? And you're going to get their take on it, and then he can kind of nuance you from there. And he was always just so open to your idea, and even if he didn't like it, you wouldn't necessarily know that, And
he wasn't I'm not a musician, so I didn't play on the dates, but I would just observe a lot. I noticed you never heard him really say, no, I don't like that. Nah, not that. No, let's do it again. Try it again. That was his way of saying, keep it moving,
Something different. Yeah. And Michael actually was the same way. And I think he may have gotten that from Quincy. I'm not sure. They were similar souls in that kind of a way, of like looking for, searching, for the creativity to emerge. And, and especially in Quincy's case, did you have any, how there was the story of, which is true, of putting the sign on the door for We Are the World?
Yeah.
Leave your
Check
ego.
your ego. Yeah.
Was that a theme in his life before We Are the World?
Yeah, absolutely. I heard he used check your ego a lot.
He used to say it?
Yeah, he would say it. If we were working on something or there was a group effort, more than one, say, hey man, check your ego. We're spitballing here. This is wide open. So some of the stuff might get shot down, Don't fall in love with your ideas. Check your ego at the door.
Right.
Yeah.
And also the thing that he would say a lot about leaving a little bit of room for God in the room.
walk in, yep.
Very related, right?
Because very much so.
We don't know everything, and if you create the right environment, and it was like sacred environment. I mean, the first time I ever met Quincy, he hugs people, and then everybody sees that, and you're welcomed, and then you're like just treated like you've been there with everybody. And it creates that sacred environment so that everybody can feel, because in the beginning you'd be more timid with your ideas. Yep. And it was like without words, because, through colors and things like that, hearing, you felt like you could say something and contribute something, and it was like open for it.
Yeah, I come from a loving family, but there wasn't a lot of hugging, and I love you, man. We didn't have a lot of that in my household. So when I first got around him a lot, and that was kind of a prevailing notion, it was a little weird at first. Dude, what? And then, it becomes contagious at a certain point,
Well, we're humans, right? And that's what we yearn for, is to it gives it more meaning, I think. Did Quincy have any nicknames for you?
For me?
Which I know, but I want to hear you say.
My family nickname is Bugs. I was always called, nobody in my family calls me Ed. And anytime I'm with family members, call me Bugs, or people who are close to the family. So Quincy knew me as Bugs, so he's always called me Bugs. So if there had to be a nickname, this is when he would call me Edward. So Bugs, Bugs. Well, we talk. If he calls it Edward, I was like, oh, What's going on now?
Just so you know, it was a warning.
Either a warning of something that I did or something was about to happen. We've got something that we're going to do, or what do you think about, that kind of stuff,
Yes. Well, Quincy had sort of a whole family of people that, let's talk about that, like how important that was to Quincy to have his I don't know what exactly to call it, like his camp, his people, because it has to do with, we talked about Quincy having a vision, right? Mm-hmm. Surrounding yourself with people around you that are aligned, right, with your vision, and then the continuing long relationship with everyone. How did you see that happen and develop?
One of the things that I saw that I just learned from asking a lot of questions was Quincy viewed his role as a producer pretty much like a film director. So everybody that participated in his projects, he saw them as an actor, So-and-so would be perfect, is perfect for this role. So-and-so is perfect for that role, And, different actors for different situations. Once he may not use the same guitar player on every record, because Luke Lukather might be the one for this one. David T. Walker was the right one for that one, or Lee Ritenour.
Right.
Fill in the blank was one for this one. So there was a lot of that of just casting. Casting was really important to him. And he had a core sort of repertory group that he would use, obviously Phil Gaines, J.R., Lewis, Nathan East, different guys.
Well, also Bruce.
Bruce Fedine, of course, yeah.
And Rod Temperton was an arranger go-to, and Jerry Hayes for the brass. It was perfect.
Very much so. And guys like yourself, you and Boddicker and, a few others who were, synthesists that were his go-to people.
Yeah, and I mean, he was
Tom
working
Baylor.
with Mike, well, for sure, Tom for the vocal arranging, and a lot of other, he could see, give you a shot at a lot of things once he sees you have talent. But for me, it was coming in because I came from film. So at the time of Thriller, it was to bring a cinematic thing to the synths, so he cast me in that way. And I grabbed these the other day. I'm gonna break these out just on this point. I didn't know what I was gonna do with them for this interview or anything, but you talk about casting, and I followed through with Quincy up to Color Purple. I was working on the films after Thriller, right? Fast Forward and Slugger's Wife and stuff like that, right? You worked on some of those, right?
Slugger's Wife was at, what was her name?
Rebecca De Mornay.
Rebecca De Mornay, yeah. Remember that was a project we did, yeah.
Yeah.
We did soundtrack too, yeah.
Yeah, and Sydney was the director for Fast Forward.
Yep.
So when I was working on Color Purple, this is a great example of how Quincy, he called it casting, right? Composers. So he would get multiple composers for a given scene. And I actually have all the scores from the Color Purple of the demos from all the different composers that Quincy cast. And you can see there's Jerry Hay here, Fred Steiner, some of the, and he was mixing with Chris Boardman, mixing and matching young people, the experienced people. And my job, I was cast to do synthesizer mock-ups for Steven Spielberg so he could hear the orchestra before it was recorded. Yeah. But the idea was casting the composers to find the right voice for the music, for the scene, the same they would cast an actor. Isn't that incredible? Yeah. And on top of that, my Quincy story, the reason he knew I could do that is I had a party in Hollywood, and it was my new studio, and I showed an animated film that I did, the whole score sounded like orchestra, and it was featured in Keyboard magazine at the time, but all on synthesizer, and no one had really ever done an all synthesizer thing that sounded like orchestra. Well, Quincy couldn't come to the party, right? But a lot of people can't come to the party. I invited like 500 people. I got a telegram from Quincy. Who does that? Doesn't that sound like a Quincy thing to do?
Very much so, yeah.
Like with a lot of words. I never have received a telegram ever in my life. Can't come to the party, whatever, gave me this amazing, made me feel so great, but followed up and said, hey, were you playing any music? What was going on? I sent it to him, and that's where he followed up and listened to the tape on a cassette, right? And then that led to us doing this on Color Purple. The first time it was ever been done. And now orchestral mock-ups, Quincy called them Polaroids because you've heard his term, right?
Yep,
that was Quincy's term because it came from we didn't have automation on the consoles, right? So you take Polaroids of the mixing console and put tape up, don't touch this, whatever. He carried that across and he heard the tape that I sent him and said, these are Polaroids for Steven to hear the score. And now orchestral mock-ups are part of, film music that directors use all the time. But it's Quincy, again, ahead of his time.
Absolutely.
And who knew that just by inquiring, I'm like a 24-year-old kid, like doing something, and he turns that in, but he does that all the time.
Yep. He, well, they say youth will be served. He was very respectful of young talent. He loved young talent, young minds, and the stuff that we bring to it. Because, as I said in one of the notes I sent to you, that when he asked me what I wanted to do, I was scattered all over the place. I want to do this, I want that, sort of world domination and takeover. And he was kind he was living about it. Calm down there, big guy. Let's just walk down the hill, and deal with one.
Well, at the USC.
Seminar?
Was it a seminar? Right. Like,
I guess it was,
you guys were talking.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you also said produce.
Yeah.
And Quincy said...
We already have one of those here. You get to do everything else.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the things that resounds the most from my period of time with him was just the breadth of thought in his head, just and dream and goal, just I see that his panoramic view was larger than everyone else's, that I've ever encountered in the business. He thought, when you hear about people saying he thinks big, he thought beyond big, and more often than not was able to execute his beyond big, and an idea that he may have had, say for the conversation today, when's this going to happen, would manifest itself, 2 years down the road, whatever,
He keeps it.
He'd keep it, he'd recycle his ideas. Just like that file you have, he'd pull out a file, he'd write everything down, he'd just pull stuff out and, oh yeah, that was a good idea, and go back to it,
Yeah. Well, he also would get ideas from technology, because a lot of people are commenting on the channel and on the internet too about like this bygone era, of music, and why don't we do things like the way, back then, like how Quincy did it. But Quincy wasn't really doing things like how the people before him were doing it. He embraced the technology that Bruce brought to the table of being able to do multi-track recording on 3 tape decks, so 72 tracks or more. Right. With all the slowdowns that happen, it wasn't always smooth. The machines didn't always lock up.
Right.
And drum machines, synthesizers in the production. This is all brand new. It wasn't like, and also overdubbing. It wasn't just like all record at the same time and mix it. And so I think that's important for people to know too. But the thing that Quincy had to be a visionary that very few other people had was the hands-on experience, not just being like a record company person who was a great judge of talent or a great businessman or great at marketing. Quincy happened to be great at a lot of those things. And it included being a musician, a songwriter, so he could relate on the level, like be a real artist's friend and understand like what it's like to go through to come up with the tune, right? And the arranger, talking to the arranger in a cool way. So you're not like telling him too much, but you're telling him enough. He was able to do that because he had hands-on experience at everything.
I used to say he was a jack of all and master of most. And it was really true. He
so
worked,
rare.
Yeah, he worked really hard at the stuff that he knew, but worked 3 times as hard as the stuff he didn't know because he was so freaking curious.
So, okay, tell us about that. He worked, right? Because he's a human being, and it seemed like he was a god, like he was just beyond. How did he work? What was his work ethic?
Reading and studying constantly, paying attention. Just for the record producer side, Quincy didn't drive, is pretty well documented. And one of the things that he would do is have his driver go to Tower Records or when the charts would come out, say on Wednesday, we'd get them on Thursday. For next Monday's Billboard, the charts would come out, say Wednesday. He would get the chart Wednesday night, and he would circle any records that he didn't have and he would send his driver to to Tower and pick up all those records, and he'd sit down and purposefully listen to every new record that had entered, the pop chart or the R&B chart that particular week, and he'd sit and sort of listen to it just to get a feel of who the artist was and what it sounded like. But then he'd turn around and analyze it, and analyze, whatever, 18 seconds from intro to first chorus, male vocal on this, whatever, 10 seconds to verse chorus, and he'd just sort of break it down methodically where he'd have a file. And if he was going in the studio to make a record with with a male singer, that he could pull out his file and say, over the course of the last, whatever, we'll call it 6-9 months, the hits that became #1 records were structured like this, He had a scientific approach to everything that he did. Not that he always used it, but it was just information,
It was a basis, like a baseline for where it could go.
Yep.
And you could break the rules once it's like music.
Yep. As they say, the numbers don't lie. He'd always say, the information, the data doesn't lie, Use the data and just, digest it and use it as you see fit, but take advantage of the fact that it's there.
What did he have to say to you about breaking away from all the people that he was connected to when he was more known as a jazz artist? And then were people saying, what are you doing? I mean, because how could everybody understand that kind of a vision when it's happening?
Yeah, he got his share from critics and stuff about, quote unquote, forsaking jazz. But, there's a long history of that, of others. So you just keep doing what you want to do and move forward. But the truth of the matter is he didn't, even though he pivoted in a different direction, he didn't really, jettison the people of that period, because he still made, many of his records, he would use guys that were the staples and stalwarts of his jazz records, He would just sort of recast them in another way.
Yeah.
And, and they would kind of look at him curiously, like, what the f*** do you want to do? And then when you explain it to him and write it down music, they'd get it,
Because he stayed true to his vision, which it transcended genre pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he was able to add rap and whatever it was that made the narrative, because he was always about the song, right? Wasn't
Song is king. That's what he used to always say. Song is queen. Song is king. Melody is queen. And
is there a prince or anything?
And Prince is Prince.
Because, what he could do then is, if the song is in charge, then direct it, color it, paint, right? And you're painting with the people you're casting into it. And then also newer genres, newer techniques. And being a musician, he could know that. He could say, I heard something over there, I'd like to put that in here. Because I see that color working with this color, even though it's not necessarily always on the table. So he would get that person who's the best at that, try to integrate it in and see what happens.
True that, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's kind of how I ended up into the mix a little bit, because I was more coming from film. I was doing some early record dates, with Lamont Dozier and that sort of thing, but it was just another example of him saying, what can we do cinematic, to add flavors to an artist this was Thriller, right? An artist that's coming into his own as a songwriter now, and more of a vision, not just great songs written for him, right? That was the power of Thriller. So what did you see happening at that moment of Quincy's development? Where does Thriller fit into the whole thing in terms of the...
Well, penultimate, obviously, in terms of commercial success. Personal taste, I was a bigger fan of Off the Wall, and I loved the Thriller record, but I loved Off the Wall just because of the kind of the newness and the freshness of the relationship. And when I say the relationship, I mean the relationships, because that's when Rod first came into his world. I remember vividly when Quincy, in one of those sessions where he was listening to records, first heard Heatwave for Boogie Nights. He loved Rod's writing from that because, you listen to Boogie Nights, it swings at first, in kind of jazz swing mode, and then, you hear all the vocal harmonies. Rod obviously had a more sophisticated sensibility than a number of those who were around him. So there was a point where Rod and his partner in crime in Heatwave, Johnny Wilder, were looking for management in the States. And they reached out to us, because we were also managing acts at the time. They reached out to us to discuss potential management of Heatwave. when the truth of the matter is Rod was really just sort of fishing to meet Quincy Jones, and Quincy, we were interested in the management side, but to really just to get a relationship with Rod, and that's where they initially connected, so it was cool. But Rod was sort of his missing link in terms of, a pipeline to songwriting. Quincy could sit and talk to him, hey man, something along these lines, I'm thinking this, oh, okay, mate. And then Rod would come back, 2 weeks later with, 6 ideas,
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And fully
realized. Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing that's crazy.
Yep.
Like Greg and I have been really analyzing a lot of Thriller stuff, and it's like a lot of it was like Rod's arrangement was already there.
Yeah, exactly.
It was just like make sounds that are similar, and Greg played basically Rod's parts but added his thing to it. But like Rod could bring, and that was another new thing at the time, because songwriters didn't come in with the whole that much of the shebang.
Right. Exactly.
To listen to it.
Yeah, usually it was, guitar, and they would play D, C, and G, and, here we go,
Well, that's what probably everybody before Rod, did you ever experience anybody like that?
I wasn't in the studio, but, no, I'm sure there were, but
songwriters that were demoing their stuff, like I don't even know how Rod was recording it.
He was recording it largely on a little cassette player,
Right.
He'd play Quincy these cassettes, and then Rod would sing, because I remember Patti Austin used to call him old porcelain pipes, because Rod had the worst singing voice you've ever heard, and he'd come and sing the part, and then it was left to Patti or whomever to discern and make sense of it,
Yeah, but the intent was there.
Oh man,
all the way through.
And you could hear the morsel of the nugget and go, oh man, I get this,
Right.
Yeah.
And then you can pass it to Bruce, who could basically interpret that into like the most beautiful sonic representation. And it when I hear the demos and then I hear it go all the way through the process, it's just like all it did was just get
buffed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With Quincy's like painting of the characters and the personalities of the people. And I think that's what people now reach for when they say the music back then was just so great, because there was contribution of the personalities, right? So let's discuss this for a second. Artists today have to do a lot of this stuff all by themselves. There isn't a Quincy, and there isn't you who's overseeing the whole thing. And there's just so much that's going on behind that too. He can't just walk in, and Quincy can't just walk in and be free to think about that without you overseeing everything else that's got to be. The chess pieces are always moving, right? There's new products ahead, or projects ahead that have to be queued up, so no pun intended, right? Et cetera.
Not to minimize my role, but not to overemphasize it either. He had a great deal of vision that certainly he would feed to me and I'd react to, and that would engender conversation between us. Off the races we'd go. He'd say, hey man, I'm thinking about, and well, what do you want to do, Jones? Blah, 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 blah. Well, let's try this, and from that banter, something would come, But his vision, like I said, he had a broader view than most. His view beyond the music was, it needs to be this. We could do it this way, And then once he got beyond the music side, one of the lines he used to say about our relationship was, he made the music, I made the noise. Which was true in many ways, but I would do my best to take the ball after he had created the ball, and then and take it and run with it. I always said, hey man, I'm gonna run this direction. What do you think? Go for it.
Right. Yeah. But it could happen simultaneously.
Yep.
And artists today, it's like there's no one. And if I can put it in this kind of way, like you're clearing the path, you're opening the pathways for these pieces of music to go, because they have to go through different processes to get to the end result, right? What would you recommend for artists today to think about, and what did you see also as the most important characteristics of the artists that Quincy chose? Because when you're that big, you can choose anybody, right? How did he know who to choose, and why did he choose certain artists? It must have been based on not just the best
passion and talent. His thing, if as he was fond of saying, it can't be your hobby. I can't be more interested in making your career happen than you are than making your career happen.
That's a powerful sentence.
I'm here to do that, but you have to be the one to say, I want to go do this. it's do you want to be viewed as an artist, or do you want to be a star? You know, if you just want to be a star, not so much. You know, at what point, you know, there's got to be some artistry in here somewhere. You know, there's got to be a core. You know, a core to what we're doing here. It can't just be, you know, I want to blow up and, you know, be on, at the time, MTV or whatever, and, you know, have a big house and have a lot of jewelry. You know, there's got to be a core artistic sense here. You know, an aesthetic. That was one of the things I got from him. Watched him do a lot with artists that, you know, they had to care. You know, he found most of his artists really, like, you know, obviously Michael was the ultimate version of it, you know, because he ate, slept, and drank being Michael Jackson.
The work ethic was like...
It was off the charts.
Yeah.
It was nuts, you know. James Ingram was that way in his way. You know, and everybody had their own sense of, you know, of what they brought to it, certainly, you know. But Quincy's sense of passion for it was off the chart. Greater than mine, quite frankly, in a lot of ways, because he was both in and of the music business, you know. For me, at times, my reality was it's what I did for a living, but I didn't eat, sleep, drink it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He did. You know, there was no such thing as off time other than when you were going on vacation. In many cases, even when he was on vacation, he was working in some way, shape, or form, you know, because wherever he was in the world, you know, he knew somebody.
Oh, my gosh. Everywhere.
And they all knew him, you know, so it was all work in some way, you know.
He told me to go to the island of Capri, you know, off Italy. Did he ever talk about that with you?
No. Go ahead.
He said, got to go there. It's just, I know you're going to love it. You're going to love it. So I eventually got there. It seemed like every place I went, there was a photo of Quincy. It was just great. I go, wow. Even when he's there,
Yep.
he's not like, he probably loved, I mean, the people, you could tell, like, what he would write on the photos, like, he was loving it and connecting with the people and trying to learn, like, how they made some dish. And I remember him telling me, like, lemon, cook with lemon. Right. It's the best thing, you know, and anytime I squeeze a lemon on something, I
think of him.
I just can't help it. Right. Because I never really thought of how the power of lemon, you know.
Right. Yeah. For me, with him, it was Japan. You know, going to Japan because they loved him over there, and he loved Japan. He loved the country, he loved the people, and he loved their love of music. You know, and they used to give him so much love and respect. France, when we were going to France with him, where he was, you know. Jerry Lewis was God in Japan at one point, you know.
It's crazy, yeah.
As crazy as that sounds.
Yeah.
And I remember once saying to him, I said, "Dude, you're Jerry Lewis with a baton." He was like,
"That's great."
Yeah,
that's really good.
And yeah, just everywhere I ever went with him, the love he got was just amazing.
Was he able to balance the personal life with it?
Yeah, I think so, pretty much. You'd have to ask his kids to really get that answer, but from what I was able to observe, yeah, his what they say, work-life balance was pretty good, but, you know, certainly it tilted more in the work sense in a lot of ways. You know, I imagine that was kind of left to, because Peggy was his wife in those days, it was left to sort of Peggy to, you know, pull him back in from the brink and, you know, bring him back into this family existence. But
well, you need it because it's not. I mean, there must have been times where, I mean, and you tell me, did every project just go perfectly? Isn't there adversity in everyone's life? Where
absolutely.
So how did you guys navigate through the adversity stuff?
What got frustrating was there was a period of time that, you know, his initial production company records that we did, because my focus was more during the Quincy Jones Productions period. I was there once he'd started Quest. We released a couple of records and then I was gone. But when we had what I call QJP, Quincy Jones Productions, all the stuff largely at that point was going through A&M. And the first Black Gold album they ever had at A&M was Brothers Johnson. First Black Platinum album they ever had at A&M was Brothers Johnson, Look Out for Number One. First Black Gold album they ever had at A&M was Quincy's Body Heat. First, maybe first platinum single, I'll say, was one of the Brothers Johnson records. But what got frustrating for us at times was because the culture, it was a great label, great place to be, but the culture musically of the label was not R&B, was not black-centered. And as a result, at times, trying to make powers that be understand what it is that he and we were trying to do fell on deaf ears. You know, it's kind of like we were speaking Turkish to people, you know, who were speaking English. And as a result, it got really frustrating from time to time that, you know, we wanted the independents to do things our certain way. He started doing some outside projects. He did a Rufus and Chaka Khan record for MCA. Other than that, everything else was at A&M for us at the time. And then when he made the deal with Mo Austin for our label, for Quest, the George Benson Give Me the Night record was a Warner Brothers record that bore the Quest logo because, you know, Quincy's thing was that if I'm going to produce it, I want it to come out on my label or at least create, quote unquote, the illusion that it was on his label. But the truth of the matter was a Warner Brothers record that he had produced. It was really pretty much the same as, in terms of the deal, was pretty much the same as everything we were doing at A&M, just with a little bit more bread involved. So it got frustrating. The lack of independence got frustrating. You know, the reality of artist ownership and the independence that's endemic to that notion became much greater after the fact. You know, so.
And that's where we are today.
That's where we are today. Absolutely, and. This goes back to a question you asked me earlier. What at times is a bit frustrating to view from someone who was in it during the so-called golden days, the heyday, is that now in this sort of artist-empowered DIY environment, where a certain layer of the cake has been cut out. You know, there's plenty of icing and a lot of flour, but some of it still has, the cake hasn't been properly put together. It is that strata of your worker bees. You know, people like myself who are, you know, if not failed musicians, you know, people who had an appetite for and respect for musicianship, but we didn't do it ourselves. But the notion of being support and understanding how the business operated was extremely important, and we were helpful. We were a key part of whatever it is that was being created to help move it to the people. Now it's left in the hands of the artists to get it to the people in many cases, and they do a pretty good job. But now, you know, with digital stuff and streamers and all that stuff, it's really more in the hands of the people than ever. It's just, I don't know if I'm not articulating this well.
Well, it sounds like there's pros and cons to it.
Yeah.
To like having the systems of before, which was great if you were in.
Right.
But it was hard to get in, right? To get your demo through, because you couldn't make a finished product or anything. Nobody really knew. They were guessing. Mm-hmm. Now they can know totally, but then you have all this stuff coming up. Like you said, how does one person know how to balance everything that they're supposed to be doing in the right order? Right. That's kind of the biggest thing that I would love to be able to fill as many gaps as possible for aspiring artists and all of us at any stage, you know, because we all have to contend with today if you're trying to produce anything. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts, any light you could shine on that?
Dealing with today. I think there's just a lot of what I call half-baked music. You know, there's a reason why some of the ones that push through, to me, are more fully realized. You know, whether you're a fan of Taylor Swift or not, you have to respect the game. You know, there's serious production there. It's well done, well-conceived songs, you know, arrangements and execution. And then couple that with all the marketing stuff that she does around it. Yeah. I understand why she's the biggest artist in the world.
And consistency of vision, which is something Quincy had for his artists. And you could see, just take Michael, for example, the development from Off the Wall to Thriller to Bad, where Quincy was involved with Michael. You really see like an amazing evolution in that period of time, where he goes from someone that's singing pretty much other people's music and not contributing as much to the production to really getting in there, like every day on Thriller, working with every aspect of it and developing as a real artist and songwriter with a voice and testing it out and then finding out that he can do it. And then Bad was like kind of the first step towards the master saying, okay, Michael,
fly.
You're ready to fly, right? That like today, an artist is just like, where am I? And Taylor Swift is an example. She does do that. She can change and evolve. But then again, you know, we can just look to these examples, right? And I guess the things that you said, having the passion, having the drive. You can't be like the person waiting for other people to do the stuff for you.
Right.
Right? Like Michael was always practicing his dance moves or filling in every second. Still got to do that today.
Absolutely. You got to keep, like I said, we can't care more than you as the artist. You got to care, you know, you got to be the one who cares the most because it's your life, your art, your music, you know,
that
your career.
Says it.
Yeah.
But you have to do it under a little bit of adversity now because you just can't get the money right away, right? And people are saying like, what are you doing with your life, you know? And that's but I guess you've said like every generation has to deal with that in their own way. Like it wasn't always perfect for Quincy and you guys had to, there was a story the other night about when he took on that live performance and had to go into his own pocket.
Oh, in Europe? Yeah. Free and easy. That was long before me, but he told those stories a lot because that was a very significant and pivotal moment in his life, you know, because he had whatever it was, you know, 28 musicians, their wives, children, and dogs on the road with him in Europe, you know, trying to perpetuate and promote this opera and jazz opera, and it didn't do business, you know, and he ended up, and I guess the promoter bailed on him, and you know, he ended up holding the bag, as it were, and had, you know, all these lives to be responsible for. But he told me, he said, if there was a silver lining in it, you know, when they had this period where they were scuffling, just because the musicians basically all said, we don't want to go back home, we'll stay out here and slug it out with you. And he wasn't even convinced that he wanted to slug it out with himself. But he was like, oh, you know, let me dig in and get to work. And he ended up booking it all and developed a muscle that didn't previously exist in his, you know, in his bag. Yeah, and it's a true test of character, and people, that becomes lore, and people know that about you, and they know that he has their back in those moments of truth, because especially in this business, that was something, because this is to honor Quincy, and I wanted to do it in this kind of way where we're passing as much along as we can, but to have that like backbone and that people know that you have character, you know, in the music business. And it applies to when you're talking to songwriters, you're believable. You're not just trying to put BS suggestions in there to sell something, because there's no longevity to it. Right, true. Right? Very true. And then what good is that to the rest of you guys, like the label and everything, if there's one and dones? I do remember that Quincy used to say that the dilemma or the challenge was to constantly balance artistic credibility versus commercial viability. And that if you crossed either of those lines to one side too flagrantly, it would explode in your face. If you do something that tries to be too obviously commercial with no real artistic heart there, you know, it's, that's just some commercial bullshit. And if you do some stuff that's, you know, too heavily art school, you're not going to sell any records. He constantly said the balance that he found was the balance, walking that thin line between artistic credibility and commercial viability. Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of reason for that to be important. I don't hear this quote ever by very many or by other people, other than I heard that when I was in college at USC from Madame Boulanger, who was his teacher. Was Quincy's teacher, right? But the quote I heard from one of my composition teachers was, the most important thing you could do as a composer is survive. So she was saying, like, if you can't make any money and survive, then you can't even be a composer, because you're not going to have time to do composition. You're going to be like digging holes or whatever you're going to be doing. And it kind of fits, you know, because I've heard other quotes that he's said about her that have stuck with him. But it fits what Quincy's saying, and there's real value to it because it's at a core level of survival. Because you can't be an artist if you don't have anyone supporting you. Right, either you're driving the support or
You have to have a patron or something like that.
Right.
So how did he find the balance? How did he know?
I guess the proof of the pudding was in the eating. Once he came out and seeing how it was responded to in the marketplace. Just a gut instinct. He had a sense of what in his heart and in his gut. What worked. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. There were things that didn't work. Most notably, the first single from James Ingram's solo record was a song called "Party Animal." That kind of a bullshit song, and James was singing great on it, but it was not there. It just felt a little too trying too hard to make a hit single. So maybe that's the commercial side bouncing too much in that direction.
Yeah. But there's only trial and error would only get you so far, because if you can't just wait every time and keep having failures after failure, then you're going to get on a really short leash after a while. He must, I know the answer to this, have an innate ability to quiet himself down or something, whatever it takes to know. And I think the times I've seen Quincy listen, he really taps in. And at the seminar the other day too, I heard stories of saying how he listens to every demo tape.
Not every, but a lot of them.
A lot of them. Yeah. Well, stories.
Most of them, yeah.
That's
a lot.
Yeah. And Tom Baylor has told me that when people have played their tape for him, like just off the street, basically, he doesn't say anything negative to the person. He listens to it, and he'll find something in there that he could say and make and lift the person up. And there's not going to be a deal happening. But he's able to look for those things, and then I guess essentially know. Did you see something about him in his way that he perceived things, like that something he was doing in his lifestyle that allowed him to tap in?
He was a kind-hearted man. At his core, he led with kindness and love, and joy. And one of the things that he said to me at various times when I was young doing this, don't be an asshole, There's a ways that you can, be rejecting without having to be an asshole about it,
So like you're saying, like he just like would live with that open heart.
Yep.
And then that, I think, allows more room for truth, right?
Agreed.
I'm just learning as we're talking. Really, this is really enlightening.
And interestingly enough, for me in the early part of my career, the hardest part was saying no, was saying pass, because you always want to give somebody a sense of encouragement to keep them moving forward. But being real here, not everybody's gonna get there, and so you do find that as long as you keep trying to be positive, they're going to keep coming back, and then when you're on the receiving end of those comebacks, you kind of know who this person is. I know what this is going to be, Maybe they will stumble into a hit, but probably not. And you're constantly having to talk and humor and and avoid the inevitable, which is it ain't happening, bro. And how you navigate your way around that, he was good at it.
Well, the sense of humor helps too.
Yep.
It helps people tap into emotion, like either laughing or crying, right? And there was always a good sense of humor, and there was a good amount of. It was hard work, but I remember like fooling around. There was room left for that because it loosens people up a little bit, and it gets kind of the best out of the whole room and the performance. And that's another thing to take forward. To just. You can't have too much tension.
Right.
There's a certain amount where you want to be ready, like ready position. But if your body gets too tense, you can't move quickly. You're not prepared to adapt, and which has to do with listening and picking up cues, right?
You're not facile.
Right.
He was a silly dude. It was. That's what I'm gonna miss.
The silliness.
Yeah, the silliness. He was fun,
What's some silly stuff?
Well, some stuff I can't say here, but just, he had little bits and pieces, little things that were just sort of quirks. He would dig into you. He would find stuff that he knew that was at the core of your personality, and he would always remember him. He'd talk to you about something that had happened, years before, or just little things, that he would do. I'm gonna miss those calls that I would get from him, on a middle of the day Saturday or some point on Sunday, just or in middle, late at night, during the week, out of nowhere. Edward, what's up, man? We'd start talking. He'd ask me something stupid, and then we'd giggle, and off to the races we'd go, and we'd talk for the next 90 minutes. Those conversations weren't as regular as they were when I worked for him, but in the ensuing years, we always made a point of a couple, 3, 4 times a year catching up and having versions of those conversations. So, and then when I went on to do other things at other places, he would call me and talk to me about a particular record that we were running at my label and at the label, and we'd talk about it, and just to let me know that he was hearing and knew what I was doing and that kind of stuff. So just I'm gonna miss my friend. I'm going to miss my friend. As I've said, I've known him since I was 7, so he was kind of Erzat's father, de facto big brother, uncle, friend, mentor, boss. He was all those things. And getting used to the fact that we no longer share the same area and or zip codes and universe is a daunting notion to me because, I've always had, since I was 7 years old, more or less, I've always had the opportunity and possibility to pick up the phone and say, Jones, and he'd either call me, he'd be there to pick up or he'd get back to me in a reasonable period of time, and then I could talk to him about whatever it is I wanted to talk to him about, and I'm going to miss him. I'm going to really miss him. But, he had a great run, and we were all fortunate to be a part of that run, Yeah. In times like these, it's the cliche is to say, oh, he was a great man and all that, But he was. He was flawed like all of us, but, his flaws and imperfections were minimal by comparison to his greatness and his genius, That's my man. Yeah.
And it's testimonial to all that you say that people that didn't even have an opportunity to be around him feel that.
Yeah.
When I read things that people write about, like what they got from the whole Jones experience, like following his career, just fans that followed his career and saw all that, and they picked up on a lot of these things, and they just felt really heartbroken by it, the loss,
And at 91, there was a certain amount of imminence. You knew something was coming soon, at some point, because 91, you got all nine innings of the ball game. But, just when it happens, I was in Pittsburgh over last weekend. I was back because I went to high school in Pittsburgh. So one of my best friends was celebrating his 70th birthday. So we had a surprise party and for him. And then when I woke up Sunday morning, or maybe it was Monday morning, my phone was blowing up because I turned the notifications off. My phone was blowing up from, my brother and Stephen Wright, with the information, so.
But you got to talk to him
I got to talk to him, yeah.
Really recently.
At that USC function, prior to us going to the stage, all of us the collective we who were on stage that night, had a buffet dinner up in the green room in the auditorium where we were doing the gig. And Quincy's daughter, Tina, and their son, Quincy III, Snoopy as we call him, Tina said, oh, let's FaceTime Daddy. So she pulled out her phone, and Quincy was sitting in his chair, with one of his nurses or handlers, whatever. And so each of us sort of went down the row and, extemporaneously said something to him, expressing our love, whatever, to him. And then at the end of it, we kind of pulled back and panned, and there was everybody, and you could see when the breadth of everybody being there sort of hit him. He was like, "Oh, you know? It was great because it enabled, in a very free form of the moment, got to sort of say to him, you know, how much I loved him at that particular time. And, you know, obviously he looked frail, and getting the chance to sort of say it. And I had said it before, I had said a version of it before, because when he turned 90 in March of 23, he had a birthday party up at the house for family and some close friends, and I was fortunate to be included in that group. My son and I went, Alice and I went, and it was great because when I walked in, we were all had to wear masks because it was still during COVID. So I walked in the room, you know, I had my mask on, and he looked at me and he said, I said, Q, kind of looked at me quizzically, take your mask off, take your mask off. I took my mask off and I went, bugs! And started patting the seat next to him, sit down. So,
did he mess with you?
yeah. I sat down and proceeded to spend the next, you know, hour and a half, you know, sitting next to him, shooting the, you know, we had a great time. It was awesome. You know, and got to tell him, man, thank you, you know. Thank you for everything.
And he knew, right? He knew like what he did.
Yeah, he wasn't the person who was gonna say, oh yeah, I know exactly what I did, you know, blah, 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 blah. He wasn't that guy. He was just, thank you, you're welcome, man, you're welcome. If he acknowledged it at all, you know, he's just, oh yeah, well, it's cool, you know, you did your thing, man, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, my take is I've assessed it that he gave me room to learn, grow, and make mistakes. Because truth of the matter is, in the make mistakes category, I was so young, I made so many of them then, but, you know, he basically just, you know, his theory was, if you pick up, you know what you did wrong and don't do it again, you know. Pick it up and keep it moving. So I tried my best to do that.
Yeah, what a great mentor. And then you flew. He must have been really happy to see that.
He was.
You went on to do so many amazing things after that, and groundbreaking things, being like president of Mercury.
Yeah.
I mean, so many firsts.
It was cool. The Mercury thing was cool from the standpoint that, you know, him being my mentor, him having been the first, you know, black executive of a major label at that label. And then also
and massive like budget and hundreds of people.
Yep. And the fact that he made records with my dad there was cool too. And I remember as a kid going to sessions, and those were the sessions, a lot of those Mercury sessions, you know. So this was crazy how it all tied together, you know.
Yeah. Well, like everyone in the room that you're talking about flew high.
Right.
Everybody. Like once you kind of like go through the Quincy. Well, Greg Fillinganes calls Stevie U, but there was definitely Quincy U.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Yeah, I always said I went to University of Quincy Jones. You know, I dropped out of Boston University and the University of Southern California, but I got my Ph.D. from the University of Quincy Jones.
Yeah. Wow, it's kind of like I'm not at a loss for words. I'm like at a loss for breath. Kind of. It's just like it really affects me. Thanks so much for sharing.
Thanks for having me.
Your close stories, and you know, even with the ups and the downs, the inside look at like being human, and waking up each day, and you know, thinking about dreaming what you want to be and what you can be, and sharing that vision with people that you can align with, and working at it every day. And going through it, and keeping your heart open, so that you can communicate in the most truthful way as an artist, songwriter, and human being. That's we got to experience it. You got to live it and be there. And I hope that everything that Quincy did through the music now, that you hear it and you feel it.
Very true. I agree.
Love to everyone.
Thank you. Good luck, everybody.